You won't have any questions, but just in case.
Is it rolling now, dude?
It's rolling. I can see the red light.
Oh, okay.
Just to make a general statement to kind of lay the picture and then fill in with some details later, I think we could say that, generally speaking, or the majority at least of the relatives of our generation, Walter's and mine, are folks who came over from England and Wales because of the Latter-day Saint movement that was started by Joseph Smith. Now, we probably ought to have a little bit of background there because different ones came at different times and different things happened within the church, and it helps to be able to piece them in as to what happened when. Basically, the Latter-day Saint movement, the church was organized in 1830, August 6, 1830, in outstate New York. And one of the basic scriptures were, of course, the Bible. It was the Christian movement, plus the Book of Mormon, plus what's known as the Doctrine and Covenants. The Book of Mormon is a history of the folks on this continent and their dealings with God. It was translated by Joseph Smith from some gold plates. That's part of the reason for skepticism on the part of the public generally is the gold plates aren't where anybody can put their hands on them at the moment. They were given to him by divine action. There are witnesses who testified that they did see him and lift him and so forth, but nevertheless, that's basically what that is. The Doctrine and Covenants represented instructions which he got, again, by inspiration, direct from God, which are written down and form part of the teachings of the church. Now, I think that active Christians generally feel that they, through prayer, receive answer and guidance, and I think that's true. And certainly ministers of various faiths receive that kind of guidance, and that they feel directs them in the decisions they make and the way they minister. The difference here is that these things were set down in writing. They had to be approved by the church as being really divine and not his idea only, and then they became part of the written scripture. Now, to get some idea of why this would cause people to move, the basic concept was to build, this was a responsibility that the church felt they had, to build let's say a holy city where everything would be according to strictly Christian precepts. Love and harmony would prevail, there wouldn't be any poverty and so forth, and that was their responsibility. This was the city of Zion that they were going to build, and it was to be, the center was to be in Independence, Missouri. And with this, let's say, challenge, well, that was the kind of thing that would appeal to someone. I think we can say that our forebears who came over here were people who had vision and devotion and were willing to make sacrifices for something that they felt was a worthwhile thing. Now, at one point, early in the history, the church did attempt to start building there in Independence to accomplish this, but they ran into opposition, which isn't too surprising. You know, people are already there. They didn't want somebody else taking over, and so there was a lot of discord, and it even got to the point where the governor of Missouri, a fellow named Boggs at the time, decided they were just a nuisance and issued this order that they had to be either driven out or exterminated, which was pretty serious business. But nevertheless, they were driven out, and the group headquarters then was set up over on the other side of the Mississippi River in Illinois at a place now known as Nauvoo. Again, problems arose there, and Joseph Smith, president of the church and the founder, was murdered, assassinated, and so the church was left without a leader. Now, at that point, a number of people claimed the right to lead. A fellow named Sidney Rigdon was one who was one of the counselors. Brigham Young, who was the president of the 12 Apostles, he claimed the right to lead, but many of the people remembered that Joseph had at one point pronounced a blessing on his son, Joseph Smith III. See, Joseph Smith actually was Joseph Smith Jr., but we always say Joseph Smith because his father, while he was part of the movement, isn't, generally too significant. But he was to be his successor. And so they waited, hoping that he would assume leadership. And now, incidentally, this assassination occurred in the middle 1840s. Gives you an idea of the time span there. Young Joseph was only about 10 when his father was assassinated. But when he became of age, he was willing to assume leadership, and so in 1860, he did accept the leadership of what's now known as the reorganized Latter-day Saint movement. The reason for that term was, the thought is that there was disorganization, scattering, different groups going different ways, and now this was an attempt to reorganize that. Well, of course, the Utah Mormons, who followed Brigham Young west, I think their position is that the main group went out west with them. Now, there's some question about that, whether they were a main group or just a few. Many of them probably fell away and didn't follow anyone, but at any rate, that's where young Joseph, as we refer to him, Joseph Smith III, came into leadership. Now, then from there, the headquarters moved to Lamona, Iowa, which again is just across the border end from Missouri in Iowa, and that would have been about, perhaps say 1890 or so, and then a little after 1900 down to independence. So that gives you the time frame where these things all fit in. Now, taking the family, we have Dad's part of the family and Mom's part. Now, on Dad's side, we have, of course, his father and mother. His father then, which would be my great-grandfather, was named Daniel Evans. He and his wife came over from Wales along with, they had 2 daughters, and then their son, I believe, was born on the way over. It seemed to me that's what happened there. And the 2 daughters died without ever marrying. The son was named Gomer, and he, of course, is then the father of my father, who was also named Gomer, plus Uncle Joe, Uncle Dan, Uncle Walter, and Aunt Rachel.
Question is, what cluster
Now,
is also
the reason they came over from Wales, is again because they had joined the church over there, and they're anxious to come over and be involved in this effort to build this perfect city which they hoped to build. I think they settled in St. Louis at first, I believe, but before long they moved then down to Sullivan, bought the farm property. Actually bought it in 3 pieces, but it was, well, it's been over 100 years ago that he bought the first piece, and we've got a plaque awarded to us by Franklin County that's farmed in the same family for over 100 years. He was active in the church work. Interestingly enough, I was looking at church history at one point, and there was a whole little item in there about Joseph Smith, and this would be young Joseph. He'd made a trip someplace and reporting on that. And then right in the adjacent paragraph, they had this report from Elder Daniel Evans of Sullivan, Missouri, about how the work was going down there and new members coming in and so forth. I don't know too much about the background of Grandma Evans. I think, I know she was a Presbyterian, and as far as I know, had nothing in her background to do with the church movement. But Grandpa Evans was, of course, the other way. Now, I might mention at this point, too, that, well, I said Grandpa, we got so many generations here. The one who came over from Wales is the one I was talking about, who has this item in church history. His son, who was Gomer, and was the father of my father and the others that I mentioned, he was an engineer on the Missouri Pacific Railroad. And he was killed in a train wreck. It was, he was fairly young, but he had a stretch between Washington and Jefferson City that followed along the banks of the Missouri River. In those days, they hadn't done much in shoring up the river banks. It had a lot of heavy rains, and when he was going along the track there, the weight of the engine was just too much, and the track gave way, and the engine started going down. He yelled to the fireman to jump, which he did, and survived. I remember we talked to the fireman many years. We'd stop to see him on our trips. Grandpa stayed on and kept his hand on the brake and stopped it. So he was doing that when he was killed. At that time, Dad was only 11 years old. Uncle Joe was a little older, he was 14. I think Aunt Rachel was the oldest. And Uncle Joe went to work for the streetcar company, counting transfers, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And he was the principal support of the family. Dad and Uncle Dan and Uncle Walter, to the extent they could, through odd jobs and so forth, they all helped to keep the family going. So that was the situation there. On Grandma Evans' side of the family, her maiden name was Allen. Now her father, again would be my great-grandfather, was a doctor, Dr. Allen, we always referred to him. Again, he came over from, I think it was England. He and his wife didn't come over as man and wife. He came over and she came over, and he had her on the
Timmy,
boat.
I want your blanket back in your room. Now,
and was very enamored of her. But she didn't want any part of him. Now they came over somewhat earlier, because this would have been during the period between the time that Joseph Smith was assassinated and the time that young Joseph came to leadership in the organization. So they went out to Salt Lake. They thought that was the place to go, where the headquarters were. When they got there, they were rather disillusioned, and they decided to leave after they'd been there a brief time. But it was rather dangerous to try to leave. At least they had the impression that people who tried to leave would be harshly dealt with. So they, you might say, they made their escape. They, one day they just kept going. They left most of their possessions behind, so people didn't know that they were escaping. He had some preaching assignment out kind of in the boondocks, and he went out on that, and then they kept going. So they did come back to this part of the country. They no sooner got back, and she divorced him. She didn't want to marry him in the first place. Being a doctor, he was in a tough spot, because divorce was pretty unusual in those days, and so people didn't want anything to do with all like that, so he had no practice. And he went back to Salt Lake and set up practice there. His wife later remarried. They had no children, that is, by the second marriage, and she settled in Lamoni. Now, before all this divorce, however, there were the 4 children born. Grandma Burgess was one. She was born in Ogden, Utah. And Sibby, Aunt Bertha, and there was one brother, but I don't recall his name. Now Aunt Sibby, or Aunt Bertha, she married and she settled in Lamoni, which at that time was church headquarters. That's where all this time thing fits in. And she went to medical school, got her MD degree, and she was the town doctor there in Lamoni, and she took care of the doctoring to the church officials, and she officiated the birth of the next president, which was young Joseph's son, W. Wallace. And he was the next president, that's true. Wait a minute. There was another president in between there. He would have been the one following that, but anyhow, he was one of the later presidents. The one who followed young Joseph was already born at that time. But, so that's where she fits into that picture. Now, Grandma Burgess was, again, very active in church activities. At one point, she was the general leader of women for the World Church. Alice talks about how she remembers Grandma primarily because we're singing 2 songs. One is We're Marching to Zion, and the other is Yield Not to Temptation. Both of us relate to this idea, you know, of building Zion. They're both, you know, kind of a dynamic, a marching song type of thing. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. You remember those, don't you all? And the other one, yield not to temptation. Yield not to temptation, or yielding is, in other words, you had to be striving for perfection and not, you know, getting off the track. So that was 2 strong impressions that Alice had. Now, of course, you may recall, too, that Grandma Burgess was a very brilliant woman. She won the women's chess championship when she was about 40 years old, and she was still champion when she died in her 80s. She defended it against several challengers during that period. So that is, now, I probably better mention, too, that the Allen side of things. The other side, of course, was her husband, Burgess, of course, was his name. Again, his parents had come over from England because of the church.
David, how goes it?
I don't know just too much about them, but except that was the case. Now, Walter has mentioned, and I think this is probably right. Well, let me mention something else before that. As often happens, you have a certain amount of friction and controversy in church situations, and we did have some turmoil there back in around 1920, 1925, and many people were disaffected. They thought that things weren't going the direction they should. And Walter has mentioned, and I think this is probably right, that our parents were not just too interested in the church. They attended, but they attended mainly because they'd been going there and they liked the folks there, and so they kept going. I know they didn't really attempt to, well, Alice, for example, was baptized into the church. The minimum age for baptism was 8, and she was 8 years old before all this controversy. With those who were, the rest of us, when we came along at the eligibility age, they didn't really push us, so really none of us joined the church as youngsters. I didn't join until after Dorothy and I were married. Hi, Sam, I'm trying to dictate a videotape. Do you want to get in on it too? Well, I think that pretty well covers the story. You know, we've covered Dad's side of the family. Now, I mentioned I didn't know too much about Grandma Evans. Her name, her maiden name was Knowles, and I do remember meeting some of what we call the Centerville cousins, who were a Knowles family living in Centerville, Iowa. But as far as anybody beyond that, where they came from or when they came, I just don't know. But at least 3/4 of the 4 fed into our present generation, that is my present generation, Walter, Sam, Alice, and I, would have been ones who came over because of the Latter-day Saint movement. So, now, if you have any questions?
Well, do you want to like maybe say the family type tree who next, like the name I hear is Senile and how they are?
Oh, okay. I mentioned Dad had these 3 brothers, Joe, Walter, and Dan, and the sister Rachel. Okay, the sister Rachel married a fellow named Sid Hawkins, and they had 3 children, no, excuse me, 4. Russell, Gomer, Senile, and Elsie. And so that's where Elsie and Senile fit in. They would be, you know, my cousin because of being descendants of Dad's, the children of Dad's sister. Now, Uncle Joe married rather late in life, and his wife died in childbirth, and the child died too, so that ended that line. Uncle Walter never married. Now, Uncle Dan, he married and had 2 children, Peggy and Bob. Bob again married and has a son named Bob Jr. Peggy married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. The daughter, gotta keep these straight. The daughter was named Peggy, and Peggy married, and she had that one daughter would be Peggy Evans. She married and had a son, her daughter, also named Peggy, which Peggy Moore in that case, because her husband's name is Moore, and a son, Overton, or OC is.
Nobody's told Arlene, have they? Nobody's told Arlene the secret, have they? No.
Now, Peggy Moore had a daughter. Excuse me. Yeah, that's right. She had a daughter.
I want. You want paper or pencil?
Peggy Evans had a daughter named Peggy Moore. Peggy Moore.
Look, let me go get to see about the food for the night. I'll be right back.
And they were divorced, and she just recently remarried. And she's supposed to be here today. I don't know whether she is or not. She lives right next door, interestingly enough, to Peggy Lesh. So, but she comes down directly from that side of things. You know, Peggy and I were talking yesterday that her relationship to Peggy next door is pretty much identical to the relationship of Claire, my granddaughter, and your children. So now, as far as the Hawkins group is concerned, there are no further descendants because Russell, while he married, never had any children. He's now dead. Gomer never married, Elsie never married, and Senile never married. So that's that. Now then, on Mom's side of things, she had 3 brothers and a sister. The sister died fairly young without ever being married, Florence. The brothers, Harold, Arthur, and Sam, were all married. Harold had 1 son, Bob. His wife was Bertha, and Aunt Bertha is still living, 95 years old, but that's where Aunt Bertha fits in. Uncle Arthur had 2 sons and a daughter, Archie, whom Sam and Betty knew pretty well because he taught down at Texas A&M for Walt until he died, really. he's now dead, and Willard, and Froso, who lives in St. Louis and is still living. Uncle Sam, he was a church historian for a number of years. He had two daughters, Evelyn and Florence, and Evelyn has kind of fallen heir to a lot of his historical papers. So Evelyn Burgess, who is Mom's niece, my cousin, is a good source of information on the Allen Burgess side of the family, and she would be the one most likely to have in her hands actual papers, you know, that would give names and dates and that sort of thing. But anyhow, that's where she fits into things. And she lives in Independence. I can't give you the exact address. I've been there numerous times. I don't need to know the address, but I know where it is, you see. So, any more questions?
How long did people live at the farm after whatever?
Well, Grandpa, or let's see, this would be Great-Grandpa Evans, died, in the early 1900s. Let's say something like maybe somewhere in the range of 1915 to 1920, because I was rather small at the time. So they lived there up to that time. Now, his wife had died ahead of him. One of the daughters had died ahead of him. Of course, Grandpa Evans had been killed before that. And the one daughter that was still there died a week after he did. So that kind of ended that. Now, he had a fellow that worked for him some by the name of Jim Burnett, that when Uncle Joe and Dad and Uncle Dan all tried to do something about this thing, they worked out a deal with Jim Burnett on a sharecropping basis, which was rather common in those days, where the owner provided the farm and the seed, and the one tenant on the farm, he lived in the quarters provided, and they shared the crops 50-50. And so he, I don't think the farm was actually untenanted for more than just a matter of maybe a few months. And then Jim, he raised a family there, and his son Earl, he took over when he died. Earl is still living there, and Earl's son Marvin has just bought the farm, so that's the story of who's still there. You think of any more, Walter?
Can you talk a little bit about Nashville, maybe, or?
Nashville, well, of course, Nashville is where we lived. When we were growing up, it's the only place I can remember living. I wasn't born there. I was born, actually, in those days, sometimes people were born at home, and I was born on Etzel Avenue, right across the street from where Uncle Arthur ended up. Let me mention one other thing. This is, I think, a little interesting tidbit. You've stimulated my thinking. I talked about Grandma Burgess, but not Grandpa Burgess. One reason being he died fairly young. I mean, I knew him as a youngster, but not for long. But his name was Samuel Roskin, and Sam is named after him. He's Samuel Roskin. I was named after my Uncle Joe. See, I'm Joseph Cedric. But although I was named for my Uncle Joe, they never called me Joe because Uncle Joe lived right next door, and that got too confusing, talking about old Joe and young Joe and so forth, so they just took the simple course of calling me by my middle name, even though I was named after Uncle Joe. But we had 7048 is where we lived. We had a lot next door which served as a kind of a playground area, an alley, and then Uncle Joe and Uncle Dan built a two-story house right across from 7038. And Uncle Joe lived upstairs, and Uncle Dan and his family lived downstairs, and of course that's where Peggy Rosen's mother grew up. But we went to the Dewey School, and we had all kinds of interesting activities there on Nashville, sleigh riding and roller skating and raising chickens and goodness knows what all. But that was, you know, definitely the family homestead.
And that's still standing, isn't it?
It still stands. We drove by there, Sam and I, and it's been a couple months ago now, and we were down to sell the farm, and it looks to be in reasonably good shape. Could stand a little painting, but basically, of course, it was a brick house, and it's just a matter of the trim that some of that was a little. One of the problems now is that nice big open side yard, they built an apartment building there, you know, so that eliminates that and puts a barrier between us and the Dan and Joe place. You're about to run out of tape, Dan?
Hopefully.
No, we're about to run out of battery, though.
Oh, is that right?
We got lots of tape. Hours and hours.
Okay, any other questions? Well, maybe I can just do, I guess you want to know about interesting incidents. One that's interesting to me anyhow, incident that I remember when Alice got married, which, you know, they go off on their honeymoon, they'd kind of like to get away from pursuers, and we didn't want her to get away from pursuers, so we kind of suspected she'd probably try to slip out the window of her bedroom, which was on the first floor in the back. We all slept upstairs. And so we had a car stashed down on Nashville out by the alley, and when she went back to her room, you know, to change her clothes, we went down there and made camp, and we saw that she was slipping out, we piled in the car and gave her the gun and shot up the alley. We got up there so fast we almost ran into the car that she was escaping in, so of course she looked out and was very surprised and disillusioned. But we didn't give them any trouble. We followed them to their hotel. I think we gave them a bottle of champagne, I think, if I remember right. But those were happy days back then.
Do you mean what Gima was like, or how Gima got her name?
Oh, how we happened to call her Gima? Well, of course we didn't. You're talking about my mother.
Yeah.
The youngsters just kind of automatically assign nicknames now.
Let's see.
As to Alice, the question. Maybe you can answer this. See, I've been giving a little talk on the phone, questions now. She wanted to know what Mom was like, and I'm just about to start saying. So, do you want to say what
Mom was like?
Yeah, do you want to get over here and
Get by Cedric.
get by me so you can
What do you mean, for a video
give
camera?
you a video camera?
No way. No way.
You don't want to say, well, okay. I would say she was just a very,
What's that, Mr. Hampton?
very loving mother.
Her
I think she
95th
really
birthday. And
went
about
all
here,
out to
leaving
know
with
to
the
do
same
what
other kids.
was necessary to take care of the youngsters.
Say, what do you want me to?
Pleasant sort, very understanding, very capable, and she's a good mother.
Was it David that started the Gima?
That may very well be. Now, I haven't attempted to start naming all the
It's okay, I got
other
it.
children that you know anyway,
Yeah.
but because you're getting down then to Alice's children and mine and so forth.
Huh?
But,
How we get Arlene? Next. That's your next.
You hear any questions asked?
I can see Mom very well, and I can see her in action, but I can't project that into the to the video. They haven't developed that capability yet to read minds and record it on tape.
Do you have any questions to ask?
Yeah, have you gone far back into the family history? You've already done all that.
Yeah.
How many hours did that take?
It took quite a while.
Good,
Yeah.
I'm glad you had that.